Reading today from the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 8, text 245. I'll just chant it. Prabhu kohe kon vidya, vidya mujhe sar. Rai kohe Krishna bhakti, bina vidya nahi ar. Prabhu kohe, the Lord inquired. Kon, what? Vidya, knowledge. Vidya madhye, in the midst of knowledge. Sar, the most important. Rai kohe, Ramananda Rai answered. Krishna Bhakti, devotional service to Krishna. Bina, except. Vidya, education. Nahi, there is not. Ar, any other. Translation. On one occasion, the Lord inquired, of all types of education, which is the most important? Ramananda Rai replied, no education is important other than the transcendental devotional service of Krishna. Purport. Text 245 to 257 are all questions and answers between Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramananda Rai. In these exchanges there is an attempt to show the difference between material and spiritual existence. Education in Krishna consciousness is always transcendental and is the best of all forms of education. Material education aims at increasing the activities of material sense gratification. Beyond material sense gratification is another negative form of knowledge called Brahma Vidya, or impersonal transcendental knowledge. But beyond this Brahma Vidya, or knowledge of the impersonal Brahman, is knowledge of devotional service to the Supreme Lord Vishnu. This knowledge is higher. And higher still is devotional service to Lord Krishna, which is the topmost form of education. According to Srimad Bhagavatam 429:49, Tat karma haritosham yat sa vidya tan materyaya. Work meant for pleasing the Supreme Lord is the best, and education that enhances one's Krishna consciousness is the best. Also, according to Srimad Bhagavatam 7.5, 23-24, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Padasevanam Archanam Bandhanam Dhasyam Sakhyam Atmanavedanam Iti Pungsarpita Vishnu Bhaktaschennavalakshana Kriyeta Bhagavat Yada Tanman ye ditam uttamam. This is a statement given by Prahlad Maharaj in answer to a question raised by his father. Prahlad Maharaj said, to hear or chant about Lord Vishnu, to remember him, to serve his lotus feet, to worship him, to offer prayers to him, to become his servant and his friend, to sacrifice everything for his service, all these are varieties of devotional service. One who is engaged in such activities is understood to be educated to the topmost perfection. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Translation again. On one occasion, the Lord inquired of all types of education, which is the most important? Ramananda Rai replied, no education is important other than the transcendental devotional service of Krishna. This is part of the famous conversation between Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramananda Rai, named the Ramananda Samvad, in which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, unlike other similar scenarios where he's meeting with one of his devotees and they're having a philosophical discussion or a question and answer type interaction, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this situation with Ramananda Roy is not giving the answers, he's asking the questions. So it's a unique lila, a unique pastime of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in which he empowers his devotee Ramananda Rai, in this case, to provide the answers to his own questions on the science of bhakti. So in this, we're using this particular verse here as a reference point for our new series entitled The Successful Student. So we're continuing on with our focus on Varnashram Dharma. That might be something that young Freddie here is not particularly familiar with, Varnashram Dharma. Varnashram Dharma is the social system given by Krishna himself. It's the best social system, the best system for human beings to organize society, because it's coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna does speak about it many times actually in the Bhagavad Gita in a very preliminary way, but the essence is given in the 4th chapter of the Gita, Chatur Vidha Bhajante Ma'a Chatur Vanyam Mayashrishtam Guna Karma Vibhagasha. That there are 4 social divisions in a real human civilization. Chatur Vanyam. Varna means a division. It's one of the meanings of the word Varna. So it says Chatur Varna. There are 4 Varnas or divisions in society. Mayashrishtam, and I've created them. And you'll see that in any human society, either in an organized way, which would be the way that Krishna has intended it to be, or in a unorganized or unrefined way, which you'll see today in a society like we have today. You'll always see these 4 classes of people. You'll see intellectuals and teachers, administrators and martial people, farmers and businessmen and labourers and artisans. They will always be there in any human society because Krishna created human beings in that way, in those 4 divisions. Maybe just close that window. So today we see it in a disorganized form. The idea given by previous acharyas, particularly Bhaktivinoda Thakur in the modern age, and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Srila Prabhupada, is that this system of Varnashram Dharma should be reintroduced. In other words, it's been lost due to the influence of the age of Kali, and so in order for human beings to make easy spiritual advancement, there actually needs to be a sane human civilization. That's the reason why it's hard for people today, because there is no sane human civilization. That is the symptom of the age of Kali. So we're trying to understand through the vision of these great souls how such a system could be revived. And although Krishna has explained in that verse in the Gita, Chatur Varnyam, that human society consists of 4 varnas, or occupational divisions. That's actually only half of the system. The other half of the system is the ashram side, which deals with the different phases of a human being's life. So as a human being, your varna, generally speaking, doesn't change your occupation. You're born with a certain nature, and that nature doesn't change. It can become purified, but generally speaking, that's what you're stuck with in this life, because it's a product of the 3 modes of nature in a particular conglomeration which you're born with. So Krishna says guna karma vibhagasha, that your karma, your work, is determined by your guna, your qualities, meaning the qualities of the body that you have in this lifetime, the material qualities, goodness, passion, and ignorance. So the varnas then are divided according to the qualities of nature. Brahmanas in the mode of goodness, Kshatriyas in the mode of passion, Vaishyas the mode of passion and ignorance, Shudras conditioned by the mode of ignorance. So in this way, the 4 occupational divisions are divided, and they are something that's not flexible, you could say, because of the body that we have. At least materially speaking, they're not flexible. But then we see human beings also have various phases in their life. We are born and we go through various phases from birth to death. And so the other side of the varnashram system, the ashram side, facilitates spiritual advancement in those different phases of life. So there are also 4 divisions then of spiritual facility given by this system. Traditionally they're called brahmacharya, or student life, grihastha, married life, vanaprastha, retired life, and sannyas, renounced life. And traditionally one would go through those, generally speaking, a man would go through those various divisions from birth to death. Not in all cases, but that's the general idea. So today we're going to, today and in the next class, we're going to look at the brahmachari ashram. We've titled this series The Successful Student, because a brahmachari is a student. Sometimes people have the idea that a brahmachari is this, or a brahmachari is that. Is a brahmachari someone that wears a saffron dhoti? Is a brahmachari someone that has a seeker? Is a brahmachari someone that does book distribution? You could say, generally speaking, all those things can be true. But the main symptom of a brahmachari is that they're a student. Brahmachari is the first part of a man's life, generally speaking, in the Vedic culture, in which you're a student. That's the same today, right? You still see at the beginning of people's lives, they have to become a student, generally for some time. So, what does it mean to be a successful student? That's the question. And we're not strictly discussing the brahmachari ashram, because many people coming to Krishna consciousness today, many men, they are not suited to the brahmachari ashram. And then of course we also have ladies coming to Krishna consciousness today, in case you hadn't noticed, there's quite a few ladies, and they're also not suited to the brahmachari ashram. So nevertheless, everybody needs some kind of student life, which then becomes the solid platform for the rest of your life. Just as in the ordinary sense, one goes and becomes a student, and the idea is that education in student life sets you up for the rest of your life. So it's the same in bhakti. Everybody has to have some kind of student life that sets them up for the rest of their life in bhakti. So the question is, what does it mean to be a successful student? That's what we'll address in this series. We did give a previous series on the successful family, so we're not really working sequentially here through the ashrams, the various statuses of life. In any case, we're addressing the student life, or how to practice bhakti successfully as a single person in this series. Successful family, that was about how to practice bhakti as a married person, because most people, sometime in their life, they want to get married, and therefore, because the family situation is challenging, to say the least, in this age, we wanted to address that first, and we gave 3 classes on that, because there's a lot to discuss in family life. Student life, much more simple, so we just give 2 classes on that one. So in this will have 2 classes, and in the first part of this class, we're attempting to address 2 points. One point is, these are in the context of what it means to be a successful student. Number 1 is, what is education? And number 2, what are the qualifications of a teacher and a student? I was actually just looking, I was seeing on the news there a few days ago how there's a famous or infamous street in Dunedin where students go at the end of their graduation and celebrate. They celebrate graduating as successful students, and so this street is, depending on your perspective, either famous or infamous for these celebrations. And there was a photograph of, I think it was 30 couches like this out on the road, on the street, right, which were facilities for the celebration. This is so after the celebration there was something like 20 or 30 couches just out on the street, scattered with beer bottles and broken glass, and the council has to call in special workforce, to deal with all these couches. Vomit all over the couches, broken beer bottles all over the place, and some pictures of, in the middle of the day, the day after, students sleeping, still asleep on the couches. We're talking 10, 11 a.m. They had to call the fire department because people set the couches on fire. This is not the Vedic definition of what it means to be a successful student. Far from it. So, with that said, hopefully we can all understand that this is not really the purpose of student life. This is not really what education is supposed to lead to. What is education, and what are the qualifications of a genuine teacher and a genuine student? we'll begin by asking the question, what is a successful student? We answer by saying succinctly that a successful student is one who receives an education. That's why these so-called students were celebrating, because they thought they were successful. They thought they'd received an education. Now, in order to understand then what a successful student is, if we go to our definition of a successful student being one who's received an education, we have to understand what education is. And we have to understand why we need an education. So the first part of this class then is entitled, or addresses the question, what is education? And our answer here is that education is the theoretical process to meet our needs. Education is the theoretical process to meet our needs. So everyone has needs, right? We all know that. We've all got needs. And when our needs are met, our life, we consider it to be a success. And when our needs are not met, then we consider that we're failing. So again, then to understand what education actually is, with that definition, we have to understand what our needs are, because education is the process to meet our needs. So a more specific definition then of a successful student is, a successful student is one who has learned what their needs are and how to meet them. As we hear today in our purport, that there are two types of education, material and spiritual. And that's because we have both material and spiritual needs. So the material education is supposed to inform us how to meet the needs of our material self. That's the body, and the mind is included in that. And spiritual education is supposed to inform us how to meet the needs of the spirit soul. So education should equip us with both material and spiritual knowledge with which to meet both kinds of needs. However, because we're not our material bodies, we're a spirit soul, our ultimate need is spiritual. And therefore, of the two types of education, spiritual education is essential, whereas the material education is supplementary. And this is why we heard in the verse today, Ramananda Roy said, no education is important other than the transcendental devotional service of Krishna. That's the essential form of education, because only that education can actually teach us how to meet our real needs. This might seem to exclude material education entirely, but we'll address the actual place of material education as we go on. It does have a place. So let's now just look at a few quotes from Srila Prabhupada about education. He writes in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 2, this chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called the King of Education because it is the essence of all doctrines and philosophies explained before. It is the most confidential because confidential or transcendental knowledge involves understanding the difference between the soul and the body. And the king of all confidential knowledge culminates in devotional service. You remember Prabhupada also explained that in our purport today, and we'll have a look at that a little later. There are these different levels, even of spiritual education. Generally, people are not educated in this confidential knowledge. They are educated in external knowledge. As far as ordinary education is concerned, people are involved with so many departments: politics, sociology, physics, chemistry, mathematics, astronomy, engineering, etc. So we've all had some knowledge in these subjects, right? If we went to school. There are so many departments of knowledge all over the world and many huge universities, but there is, unfortunately, no university or educational institution where the science of the spirit soul is instructed. Yet the soul is the most important part of the body. Without the presence of the soul, the body has no value. Still, people are placing great stress on the bodily necessities of life, not caring for the vital soul. So as Prabhupada hints at here in this purport today, the problem with as he hints at in this purport, the problem with education today, meaning education is the process by which we learn how to meet our needs, is that there's no accurate self-concept underlying it. And therefore, students at best, they simply learn how to meet the needs of the body, although I don't know if those students in Dunedin really even learn how to meet the needs of their body with their celebration. But that's the idea. You learn simply how to meet the needs of the body at the expense of the needs of the real person, the spirit soul. So you're taught you are the body, you have bodily needs, and here's some information by which you can get a job, make some money, and meet the needs of your body, and in this way you're a successful student. But this is at the expense of the real person, the spirit soul. So without spiritual education, simply material education alone, it actually turns a human being into a polished animal. That is the conclusion of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport to Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 3, Text 19, the general mass of people, unless they are trained systematically for a higher standard of life and spiritual values, are no better than animals. And in this verse, they are particularly put on the level of dogs, hogs, camels, and asses. Modern university education practically prepares one to acquire a doggish mentality with which to accept the service of a greater master. After finishing a so-called education, the so-called educated persons move like dogs from door to door with applications for some service, and mostly they are driven away, informed of no vacancy. Has it ever happened to anyone? Oh, it happened to me. I didn't have a university education though. But this is common. As dogs are negligible animals and serve the master faithfully for bits of bread, a man serves a master faithfully without sufficient rewards. Right, so this is how modern so-called education trains people, how to be good Shudras. That means how to go from door to door, begging for some kind of employment, some kind of service to a master. And as Prabhupada says, often they're neglected. So after 15, 20 years of so-called education, this is your success. That you can then go door to door begging for some employment. And mostly you're driven away informed of no vacancy. Now in his purport to Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Text 8, Srila Prabhupada explains how our real needs as spirit soul can be met. He says that the question of satisfaction of the self is raised herein. The self is beyond the gross body and subtle mind. He is the potent active principle of the body and mind. Without knowing the need of the dormant soul, one cannot be happy simply with the emolument of the body and mind. The body and mind are but superfluous outer coverings of the spirit soul. The spirit soul's needs must be fulfilled. Simply by cleansing the cage of the bird, one does not satisfy the bird. One must actually know the needs of the bird himself. So I've all heard that analogy before, right? Cleansing the cage of the bird, but then forgetting to feed the bird, right? That's modern so-called civilization. The need of the spirit soul is that he wants to get out of the limited sphere of material bondage and fulfill his desire for complete freedom. This is a very amazing, out of me, all of Prabhupada's amazing purports, but this particular purport always struck me very deeply. That's actually our desire. That's our actual need, is we want complete freedom. We were discussing that with Liam the other day. Or was it you, Freddie? I think it was both of you. We discussed it online. Yeah, it was you, remember? At New the Raj, we discussed freedom. Yeah, we actually have a desire for complete freedom. Remember I was quoting Nelson Mandela. Right? He said that there's no such thing as partial freedom. You're either free, completely free, or you're not free at all. So this is what Prabhupada is also saying. The need of the spirit soul is that he wants to get out of the limited sphere of material bondage. That means he wants to get out of the cycle of birth and death. Because as long as one is bound to the cycle of birth and death, how can he say that he's free? He's just having one body after another forced upon him by material nature. Right? In which he has to take birth, get sick, get old and die. So where's the freedom? Of course, in a contemporary education will try to train us that freedom is consumer freedom. And freedom is acquired because the more consumer options you have, the more free you are. Therefore, we live in a uniquely free situation here in this wonderful consumer society. The more purchasing options you have, the more free you are. You've got so much choice, right? And therefore, the drive in education today is for economic development. Because in order to actually act on that potential to make a choice, you need money. So the more money you have, the more purchasing power you have, and therefore the more freedom you have, apparently. This is the Kali Yuga definition of freedom. Of course, they don't talk about the paradox of choice, even just looking at freedom in that very limited way. They don't talk about the paradox of choice. What is the paradox of choice? Anybody know?
Could have chose something better.
It's part of it.
The more options there are, the less satisfied you are, or the more anxiety there is.
Yeah, because you've got to go through all the different choices and analyse, which kind of washing machine should I get? There's 782 different models in the shop. Which is the best one? If there's just one model, you just go in and buy a washing machine and get on with your life, right? You go and wash your clothes, get on with your life, but you've got 782 different choices. So it takes you, 4 years to decide, right, what washing machine to buy. Of course, if you just have a more traditional life, you don't need a washing machine at all. You just live by a river. Go and wash your clothes in the river. It's not a problem. Then you don't have to even choose one washing machine. Of course, that's very primitive. Everybody knows that. So the paradox of choice. Basically, the more choices you have, the more anxiety you're in. But society's trying to convince us that we're free because we have more choices. Right? But for all those choices, are the choices free? No. They require money. Does money fall out of the sky? No, you have to work for it. Right? That means you have to work for your freedom. And the harder you work, apparently, the more money you get, and then the more money you get, the more free you are. All makes sense, right? So this is actually what modern so-called education is geared for. And those who are the acharyas of this particular Siddhanta, they're all businessmen. All right? I'm sure you can hear in this philosophy a business mentality, right? And so not only did they make business out of you through this philosophy, in other words, once you've become a quote-unquote successful student graduating from the University of Dunedin or whatever, right? Because then you become a nice, easily manipulated consumer who work like a dog, going from employer to employer, right, to get a little bit of money, which you'll then spend on their products, right? But they'll also make money out of you by charging you tens of thousands of dollars to go to the university to get this education, which you need to then get a job, right? So they make money out of you at both ends. They make money out of you before you're educated, right, by charging you thousands and thousands of dollars to learn some ordinary thing, right? And then they make money after you're educated, because they've convinced you that freedom is all about purchasing power and consumer options. Smart, right? On a certain level. Problem is, it destroys people and it destroys the planet. But if you don't worry about that, it's great. You know, if you don't worry about individual well-being, if you don't worry about social well-being, and if you don't worry about the well-being of the planet, it's fine. Makes a lot of money. Back to this purport. The need of the spirit soul is that he wants to get out of the limited sphere of material bondage and fulfill his desire for complete freedom. He wants to get out of the covered walls of the greater universe. This is very visual. You can imagine yourself in this universe and the walls of the universe just covering you. Well, actually, we want to get out of it. We want to get out of those walls. He wants to see the free light and the spirit. That complete freedom is achieved when he meets the complete spirit, the personality of Godhead. So this is the actual purpose of education, to help us to meet that need of the spirit soul, to meet the complete spirit, because that can only that meeting can provide complete freedom. So because we're spirit souls, our real need is spiritual, and therefore spiritual education is essential for fulfilling our greatest need for complete freedom in loving relationships, by teaching us how to meet the complete spirit. So this is why Prabhupada says in his purport in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 text 29, if somehow or other one can understand the subject matter of the soul, then one's life is successful. If somehow or other one can understand the subject matter of the soul, then one's life is successful. So a successful student then has learnt how to meet his spiritual needs by understanding the subject matter of the soul, and in this way his whole life becomes directed to ultimate success. So at this point, we should address the topic of what is the purpose of material education, because this begs the question, if we're actually spiritual, then what is the point at all of any kind of material education? Isn't it just useless? One may think that after hearing these statements from Srila Prabhupada. And also we heard today, Ramananda Roy said, no education is important other than the transcendental devotional service of Krishna. Prabhupada commented in the purport, material education aims at increasing the activities of material sense gratification. Also, in his purport to Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 text 8, Prabhupada says, academic knowledge, scholarship, high position, etc. are all useless in solving the problems of life. Help can be given only by a spiritual master like Krishna. The problems of material existence, birth, old age, disease and death, cannot be counteracted by accumulation of wealth and economic development. In many parts of the world there are states which are replete with all facilities of life, which are full of wealth and economically developed, yet the problems of material existence are still present. So one might hear these statements and think, well, I don't need any kind of material education, it's a useless waste of time, right? If material education only caters to the needs of the body by providing knowledge of just how to increase economics, how to increase sense gratification, then what is the value? That's the question. So it does have value, but it only has value in relation to spiritual education or the spiritual goal. The proper use of material knowledge of any kind is to understand how to meet the needs of the body, because remember that's all it's dealing with, it's just dealing with the needs of the body, in order to facilitate the ultimate necessity, right, of meeting the complete spirit, developing love for the Supreme. In other words, the body is simply a material vehicle. It's a yantra, as Krishna says in the Gita, meaning a machine made of the material energy. Just like we have a vehicle, we have a car, it's just a machine, right? Yeah, it has need. If you want to run the machine, it has certain requirements, has certain needs, right? You have to have petrol, you have to have oil, you have to have water, you have to pump your tires up, right, etc. But without a driver, what use is the machine? Right? But if there is a driver and the driver understands that I can use this vehicle to meet my needs, and actually does that, then the knowledge of how to take care of the vehicle is very valuable. But if he just uses the vehicle to joyride, or like we hear here in Willis Street, boy racing, right? You know why they call it boy racing, right? Because men don't race on the street. Men go to a racetrack. Right? So, in other words, the boy racers, they don't understand, even in the ordinary sense, the purpose of the vehicle. The purpose of the vehicle on a public road is to get from A to B safely. It's not to race down the street, right? Similarly, if we only have mundane, ordinary knowledge, then we're just going to use our material body, our material vehicle, to try to enjoy the senses. Right? But if we take that knowledge of how to utilize the vehicle, how to maintain the vehicle, how to run it properly, and actually then utilize the vehicle for the body for self-realization, then that education of how to take care of the body then has value. But in of itself, it intrinsically doesn't have any value. If you connect it to Krishna, then it's valuable. So Prahlad Maharaj, he also explains this in his teachings to his school friends. Right? Komara acharet pragyo dharman bhagavataniha dulabha manusam janma tarapya dhruva martadam. He says that the body is a dhruva, it's a temporary, impermanent vehicle, but artadam, at the same time it can provide great value if it's used for self-realization. And therefore, from Kumara, from the tender age of childhood, he says, one should acharet pragya, if one is actually intelligent, dharman bhagavataniha, one should learn the science of bhakti. Right? And at the same time, in order to facilitate that lifetime of bhakti, one also will need some material education to maintain the body, and then use that body for self-realization, to meet the ultimate need of the soul. So to maintain the body for self-realization, that's the actual purpose, that's the proper use of material knowledge, material education. Otherwise, in of itself, it doesn't have any intrinsic value. As Sutta Goswami says, Shrama eva hi kevalam, just has no value. Remember, in the purport, Prabhupada explained 4 levels of education. So he explained that there was there was material knowledge, so that's just dealing with increasing the activities of the body, sense gratification. Then he explained there's impersonal knowledge, understanding the all-pervading impersonal Brahman. Above that was Vishnu Bhakti, right, devotional service to Lord Vishnu. And then beyond that, the highest form of education was education in Krishna Bhakti. Right. So Ramananda Roy replied that replied to Lord Chaitanya by saying no education is important other than the transcendental devotional service of Krishna. That's the ultimate form of education, beyond even not education in impersonal Brahman, even beyond devotional knowledge of devotional service to Lord Vishnu, is that devotional service of Krishna. Because Krishna is the all-attractive form of Godhead. He's the ultimate object of love. So to conclude this part of the class, ultimately a successful student is one who receives an education in Krishna Bhakti, because that king of education, what Krishna refers to in the Gita as Raja Vidya, has the potential to meet our ultimate need to love God in his most attractive form as Sri Krishna. Does anyone have any questions before we go on to the second part, qualifications of teacher and student?
Why aren't women suited to, and why can't there be women's brahmachari ashram?
Good question. Traditionally, women's education is given in the home as opposed to in a dedicated school, which would be the case for boys. So in the Vedic culture, then the education, both genders are educated, but it's in a different context because of the different psychologies. So the ladies, they generally feel more comfortable and secure in a home environment, whereas the men, they're more adaptable and they learn better in an environment out of the home. So it's basically to facilitate the different psychologies and therefore the different ways that the genders will learn better. So the reason that not every boy, but a lot of the boys in the traditional culture would be taken out of the home is that the idea is that the man, he has to learn, if he's going to actually be successful in his life, he's going to have to learn how to live independently of women. And because as long as he is dependent on women, then he can't develop his actual masculine qualities of leadership, intelligence, determination, sense control, humility. Those things don't develop in men unless they learn how to work independently of women. Now, in the family, then the sons will be greatly cherished by the mother. This is if the mother is actually really a mother. she will be, if she has sons and daughters, then she will be more attached to the sons, and the father will be more attached to the daughters. So the tendency then of the mother in the home, if the sons are there, is that she'll always want to basically pamper the sons. She'll want to do everything for them. You may remember this. I don't know exactly everybody's background, but I was thinking about myself. When you're a boy, say, in single digits in terms of your age, mum basically did everything. Mum, cleaned your room. Mum made your bed. Mum washed your clothes. Mum cooked dinner. Mum took you here. Mum took you there. Mum did everything, more or less, right? Dad's involved a little bit, but not as much as mum is. So the problem with that for the boy is that the boy never learns to be independent. He always remains dependent on, in this case, his mother. And so what happens then if that carries on into teenage years is that the boy, he transfers his dependency from his mother to another woman. So it'll be, say today it'll be like the girlfriend, right? And so, therefore, again, he doesn't learn how to be independent of women. He's always dependent. Whereas the man, he should be learning how to be independent. And in that way, he can actually benefit himself, and he can benefit any dependence that he has. Right, so then he can, when he enters into family life, which most people do, he can be then a proper leader of the family. But he can then guide the family, because he's not, meaning he can give particularly spiritual guidance to the family, because he's not under the control of his wife. Right, he learnt as a boy how to live independently of women. So then, at a young age, the boys, generally speaking, would be taken out of the home, right? So that they learn from a young age how to basically live independently of the mother, right? So they learn how to clean their room, how to make their bed, how to wash their clothes, how to cook, right? All the things that the mother did for them, they learn how to do them themselves, right? And then they're not dependent on the mother. It doesn't mean that they don't have affection for the mother or they don't appreciate the service of the mother. It just means they're not dependent on the mother. It's not like I need a woman around because otherwise I can't survive, right? And then generally people marry at some point in their life. So then in that situation, the same mentality and the same experience is carried through, right? That I'm not under the control of a woman. Again, it doesn't mean that one's not affectionate or that one doesn't appreciate the service. But one can be in that independent position. So that's very important for men. And that's what you don't see today with men, which is why the men, they have adult bodies, but their mentality is really like a boy, because they have not had that training, that education and training. So that's why you see the men, they can't live independently of women. They can't at any opportunity they're looking to just have some kind of play like a boy, like let's go and play a sport, let's go and race the car on the street, let's play computer games, let's just these are not the activities actually of a man. They're activities of boys. That's what boys do. Boys want to play all the time, right? So that's what you see today with the men generally, is they just don't want to be responsible. They don't want to control their senses. They don't want to take on any kind of austerity, any kind of difficulty. They don't want to be responsible for a woman. They want to just move from woman to woman to woman. Right? So in this way, they're basically pretty useless for even material purposes, what to speak of spiritual purposes. And that's why the women are so disappointed, because the nature of a woman is to take shelter of a man. They want the stability and the dependability of a man's nature, but the men are not stable.
I have another question. So if they're unable to do this, if they're useless in these...
I don't mean that in a really...
No. It's okay.
It's just a factual statement.
Yeah, but isn't that them just being useless materialistically? They're not... They can still be useful spiritually?
Yes, but it's more difficult, because spiritual life is the ultimate responsibility, right? It's easier to be materially responsible than it is to be spiritually responsible, because material responsibility is natural for a conditioned soul. In other words, we will be responsible if we see there's something in it for us, right? But the men today, they don't see there's anything in it for them, and even if they do, they just haven't had the training to act in a responsible way. So if you can't be responsible materially, it's going to be, it's going to be very difficult to be responsible spiritually, because that's in the beginning stages of bhakti. It's a more we don't see necessarily what's in it for us. It's easier to see our self-interest materially and to sacrifice for that than it is to see our self-interest spiritually and sacrifice for that. So the way that the traditional culture is arranged is that the man learns how to be materially responsible, and then he takes that same attitude into spiritual life, and then the spiritual life it's much easier. So it's not impossible. It's just more difficult. This is simply looking at things from a particular angle. We're not taking into account here the process of bhakti as given in this age by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. That makes up actually for everything that is not there materially in the age of Kali, as long as one fully dedicates oneself to that process. So in other words, just by chanting Hare Krishna, if you're serious enough about it, then even if none of us have really had the ideal upbringing and the ideal education and things, but we can make up for all of that just by chanting. Nevertheless, to the degree that we can understand these points and apply them, that will make the chanting easier. Therefore, we're having the class.
Isn't our purpose to give devotional service, though? Is chanting devotional service?
Absolutely. It's the most important aspect of devotional service in this age.
But how does... Because to me it seems... Well, for me, I enjoy it, and it feels kind of selfish, so maybe that's my perspective of it. But yeah, I don't see how it's makes up for not taking on any responsibilities materially or spiritually.
No, I don't mean it makes up for being responsible. It's the ultimate responsibility. What I meant was that by chanting, you can make up for all the disadvantages of being born in this age.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you understand? Like in the traditional culture, we would have had so many benefits materially, which would, if we wanted to, been able to help us on the spiritual path. We don't have those benefits today because of the culture that we live in. But nevertheless, if we chant Hare Krishna very seriously, we can make up for all that.
Okay.
In other words, the chanting brings us all the advantages of what we would have gained in a more ideal time and more.
Sure. So it wasn't always advised to chant.
It's always advised to chant. It's just that in this particular age, chanting is the only advice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because in other ages, people are more qualified. Like they have this proper training, generally speaking, and therefore other processes are recommended. Chanting's always there. It's just that each age facilitates, or each age has its own method, which is most effective. And so in the age of chanting's always effective, but in this age, it's the only thing that's effective because we don't have this the advantages of a real human civilization.
What are those advantages?
Like I explained, from a young age, the boys are trained. Right? How to be responsible, how to be sense controlled, how to be selfless, humble, tolerant. Right? Can you see how that would help you on your spiritual path?
Yeah. Yeah. I can see it.
Yeah. Anybody else have a question?
Just to what you just said about the boys being dependent on their mother and how that leads to basically continued dependence on women and later in life. There was, I don't think I've heard it like that before, and or at least I didn't take it on as much and didn't think about it, but I was thinking that I think it's very applicable to in my situation, because I grew up with my mom, basically just with my mum, and I was like a mama's boy. So, but I think now when you're saying that, I just realized I think not only was I dependent materially, she would do washing and stuff like that, but also emotionally. I think I was dependent a lot on my mum, and I think now, I've just realized that when I'm trying to find that same fulfillment emotionally with other women that was there that my mum gave me. So how do I fix that? Obviously by chanting Hare Krishna, but is it? You know what I mean?
Well, the as we explained, there's 4 ashrams, and most men don't stay single for their whole life. We can see that just by statistics. And so in the family situation, that can be facilitated in a way that is constructive. And also one can, because all the ashrams are meant for spiritual development, right? So as one, in other words, the ashram itself is, again, it's just a facility for spiritual development. It's not in of itself it's not in itself particularly valuable. It's only valuable if it's used for spiritual development. So the family, the student situation, the family situation, the retired situation, and the renounced situation are all facilities for a person at different stages of their life to make further spiritual advancement. Right? So the student life, that's the beginning of your life. A rare man will, because of activities in the previous life of devotional service, not require that emotional support of a woman. That's very rare. That's called Naishtika Brahmachari. And in that case, the man can just live as a brahmachari for his whole life and be peaceful with that. The much more common progress of a man's life is that he starts as a brahmachari, he gets that education, that spiritual education, he gets that training in real culture, how to sacrifice for somebody else, because when he marries, he's going to have to do that. And then he enters into responsible family life, right? And he makes further progress from there. So it's a gradual process. And through 25 years of, in the traditional system it would be 25 years of marriage, then he makes more progress. And that's what vanaprastha is. Panchasodvam vanam brajet, as the Shastra states. At the age of 50, one should give up his so-called comfortable situation at home and leave for the forest. Right? So that's a traditional reference. Actually physically go to the forest. That's what would happen in the traditional culture. But the idea is that you are then not dependent even on that emotional support of a woman. Right? So then you can live either independently from the wife, or you can live with the wife if the couple were able to cooperate during their marriage, which doesn't always happen. Right? But if they were able to cooperate, that's also there. It's also an option. The couple then really, they retire. That's what vanaprastha means, retirement. So you retire from the activities of household life. That means making money, producing children, taking care of children, maintaining the big home, all the things that go along with that. Right? So you retire from that, and you, through spiritual advancement, you realise that actually all these things are not necessary for my spiritual life. I thought they were necessary at a certain point, but now that I've gone through that phase of life and I've made spiritual advancement because I've used all those facilities in the service of Krishna, my realization has changed. Right? I've made some advancement, and I realize that actually I should use whatever remaining time and energy I've got in this body to develop my relationship with Krishna, right, more deeply. Because really, as we heard, that's as we heard in Prabhupada's purport. He wants to see the free light in the spirit. That complete freedom is achieved when he meets the complete spirit, the personality of Godhead. So that understanding is there for the brahmachari in his student life. The question is, what's his realization? So he gains the understanding as a student. The question is, how much does he realize that understanding? If he realizes it, then he can stay as a brahmachari and be completely independent of the ladies, right?
The realization being that none of that is actually necessary for spiritual advancement.
Yes. But that's a realization. It's not an understanding. Understanding is intellectual. Realization is not intellectual.
And that brahmachari can get that from chanting Hare Krishna.
Brahmachari will get that from, if it's in this life, and then he'll generally, it means that he's done it in a previous life.
So if he hasn't done it in a previous life, basically he has to go through the ashram.
He may be able to do it in this life, maybe not, it depends. But generally, if...
What's it dependent on?
Hmm?
What's it dependent on?
this depends on his desire to be Krishna conscious. How strong is the desire to be Krishna conscious versus how strong is the desire to entertain material, the material side. Right. Make sense? So some people have seen certain movies before, others haven't. Others have to see. So we have to be realistic, and that's the thing with the ashram system, is it is about it's a practical system. It's a practical system. That means one has to see what is actually doable for oneself at whatever phase of life one is in. Can't be dreamy. And therefore guidance is required. Right? Tadviti pranipatina, we're getting to that part in the class now. I think we probably have to stop here, because otherwise we're going to try and squash too much in to the end of the class. But that we're leading into that point of qualifications of a teacher and a student. So that's why we need a teacher, right? To help us. That's one of the reasons. We need a spiritual teacher to help us to see what's practical for us at any time in our life. Like I said, for many men, actually, it's not practical for them to be in the brahmachari ashram. Right? Doesn't mean you can't make spiritual advancement. Right? The brahmachari ashram is a facility for a student. That means for education and training and devotional service. It's not the only facility. It's the traditional facility, right? Although it's operating in a contemporary context, but it's the traditional men's scene. But it's not the only way that men can be educated and trained in devotional service. Point is, everybody needs a period of time in their life, if they're serious about bhakti, where they get some genuine spiritual education, some genuine training, and some genuine guidance. And then your future looks bright. Right? If you can get those three things as a new practitioner particularly, then your future's very bright. Whether it's brahmachari or the Paramakruna ashram or somewhere else, something has to be there. Otherwise, your progress will be very slow. Right? And probably erratic as well. All right? So you can, as an individual, then every man just has to see, like, with education, training and guidance, where am I at? What's a realistic situation for me at this time in my life? What's a realistic situation, meaning what's a practical situation that I can be comfortable in to make spiritual advancement? With the understanding that can change, it probably will change as one goes through one's life. It is very rare for men to remain a brahmachari for their whole life. And people from Bharat, that's more common. People from the West, much less common. It's like I was saying, I think, to Trent when I got back from Mayapur, I was sharing some realizations with him about how I was just walking around Mayapur chanting and just thought, this is the ideal place to be a brahmachari. Number one, the ladies are all covered up. I think in my whole time there on this visit, it was 5 weeks, I think I saw 2 ladies wearing jeans. That's 2 ladies wearing jeans. No shorts, no mini skirts, no bikinis, just all wearing sari, or at least, gopi suit or some kind of dress. So that's the first thing. Ladies are all covered up. Secondly, there are a lot of brahmacharis, at least at the Mayapur complex. There are a lot of brahmacharis. It's like I've heard from several brahmacharis here in New Zealand at Brahmachari Ashram in Auckland that, so-and-so Das is leaving the ashram this year, and I'm just thinking, now I'll have no friends. Right? So therefore I'll also probably have to leave. One devotee left the ashram, and this Prabhu's thinking, seriously, I've got no friends. You could never imagine that happening in Mayapur. One devotee leaves the ashram, you wouldn't even notice. There's probably hundreds of brahmacharis there. So to your point about emotional connection, emotional support, everybody needs that, right? The question is, does he need it from a woman? You can also get that from men as well. But obviously it's kind of different from that you get from women. But see, in India, then the men they've been brought up generally in stable and often quite traditional families. What does that mean? It means that it's not just the mother that's giving affection to the son. All the family members are giving affection. The brothers, the sisters, the father, the uncles, the aunties, the grandparents. So many. Right? So that's why you'll see the boys, they're often walking arm in arm. Here, I'll show you. I was just showing this to Balaram. I was just yesterday. This is part of my e-zine I just sent out. Right? This is very common.
They hold hands even.
Yeah. This is very, very common. You saw them, right? So many boys.
I had to ask my Indian friend, I said, why is all the men holding hands? He says, that's just normal. I said, in New Zealand, it's gay.
Yeah. Because, we're from a genital-centric culture. Not everywhere in the world's like that, We just think it's normal. So this is very common. So then, that's the second thing. There's a lot of brahmacharis, and they're affectionate to each other. They know how to have friendships, right? And then the third thing was that there are also a lot of older brahmacharis there, I noticed. Meaning like my age, or older. And so that's very encouraging for young men who want to remain a brahmachari for their whole life. Because they can see it's possible. There's many examples here. Now, none of those things are really present in the West. In case you hadn't noticed, the ladies are not covered up, right? It's the opposite, right? There are not a lot of brahmacharis, and they're not necessarily very affectionate. And there are certainly not a lot of older brahmacharis. So you can see why in the West it's pretty tough. India, it's much, much more possible. But, you also have to see the practicalities of your own situation. Are you comfortable? You're a Westerner. That means you'll be comfortable in the West, right? So these are some of my observations there. But the point is, each devotee has to see what, with education, training and guidance, what is a comfortable, realistic, progressive situation for me at any particular phase of life. So it can be done to remain a single man throughout your whole life, but you have to be as a Westerner, you have to be very serious about devotional service. and probably have to have a lot of salt in your spit as well.
What does that mean?
It just means that you have to be uninterested in associating with the fair sex. No taste. Right. Any other questions? I think we'll just finish the class here. We won't go into the second part. We can do that in the next class. Any other question? Yeah.
Quite a lot of interesting points there. I was just reflecting on when I was a child, like my mum wasn't really in the picture, so there wasn't any. Yeah, I'm completely unfamiliar with having like an emotional, that ability to confide in another person. So how do you develop that with your god brothers and not be afraid of it, or like the tendency in myself is to, like, if I was to confide in my father, it was basically just get lost. So that tendency in me is to be very like impersonal and just kind of very individualistic.
Yeah, well, that's common in the West, particularly because, like I said, in trying to answer Freddie's question, if the mother is actually a mother, they'll be very affectionate to the son, right? And Western life means generally, the parents are not, certainly by comparison to traditional culture, Indian culture, they're not very affectionate to their children. Often the children are not even consciously conceived. Right. I can remember my mother told me, "Oh yeah, you were an accident. I was on this new type of contraception and it just didn't work." So how does that make the child feel? Oh, great. Oh, happy day. We have to take shelter more seriously of what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is giving us, or trying to give us, in the form of chanting Hare Krishna, particularly. It's like I was saying to Freddie, that can make up for all the disadvantages of the age of Kali, right? If we take shelter of it seriously enough, Shukadeva Goswami says, Kaliya dosha nidhe rajan asti he ko mahan guna. Age of Kali is an ocean of faults. Kaliya dosha nidhe. It's an ocean of faults. You can't count the waves in the ocean. Similarly, you can't count the faults in the age of Kali. But asti he ko mahan guna. There's still one good thing. Right? Kirtanad eva Krishnasya. The chanting of the holy name of Krishna. So that one good thing amidst the ocean of faults, that can make up for all the faults in the age of Kali and much more. But you have to take shelter of the chanting very seriously. So the main problem with practicing bhakti is that we don't practice seriously enough. Yeah. We don't chant seriously enough. We don't really try to take shelter of the holy name. But that's what's required. Take shelter of the holy name. Krishna is the ultimate shelter, right? That's why the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam is entitled, is it? Ashraya? The ultimate shelter? I think it is. Because Krishna is the ultimate shelter. Krishna is non different from his name. And he appears in the age of Kali, particularly in the form of his name, to give us that ultimate shelter. But we have to want to receive it. Mukta Sangha Param Brajet, Shukadeva Goswami says. So if you take shelter of that one good thing in the age of Kali, the chanting of the holy name of Krishna, if you take shelter of that seriously, then Mukta Sangha, you become free from all the contamination of the age of Kali. Param Brajet, you're promoted to the transcendental platform of Krishna consciousness. But without attentive chanting, nothing works in the age of Kali. Single life doesn't work, double life doesn't work, retired life doesn't work, renounced life doesn't work, nothing works. Because it's the only good thing. You got to take Shukadeva Goswami at his word. You think he doesn't know what he's talking about? Right? So if we ignore or don't take proper shelter of the one good thing, then where are we? And then you have to also take shelter of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is Krishna's literary incarnation. That gives you all the education that you need to understand the process of bhakti, which begins in this age particularly with the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So the more we understand it, the more likely it is that we'll be able to take shelter of that chanting. Right? And also arrange our life to facilitate that chanting, to keep the chanting in the centre, and then everything else around in our life is just facilitation of that. So these processes of chanting Hare Krishna, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, they can make up for all the disadvantages of the age of Kali, but we have to be serious about them. And then, aside from that, we just have to practice. Prabhupada says anything can be learned by practice. So you have the 6 loving exchanges given by Rupa Goswami. If you're not comfortable revealing your mind in confidence, inquiring confidentially, which is 2 of them, then start with the other ones. Right? Giving and accepting prasad. Do you have a problem with that? Okay, so that's great. So you got 2 of them down, right? So that will soften the heart gradually. You can give and receive gifts as well, right? It's like you give books to people, right? That's you giving a gift and you're receiving their donation. Give a class, right? And then people reciprocate, they ask some question. Same with kirtan. So you start with those ones, and then gradually, by practice of the revealing the mind, inquiring confidentially, you'll be able to do it. Krishna will give you the ability. Krishna says, Yogakshemam bahamyaham. I preserve whatever the devotees have that's good, and I bring to them whatever they lack. Right? But that's on the premise that you are very serious about your Krishna consciousness. Ananyas chintayanto mam. Yajana paripasate. Tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam pahamyaham. Those who worship me without deviation, meditating on my transcendental form, to them I preserve what they have, and I bring to them what they lack. That's Krishna's reciprocation. But you got to try. You got to start somewhere. It is difficult for us Westerners. We're all suffering from the diseases of impersonalism and voidism, but we got to try. And then Krishna will help. God helps those who help themselves. Right? Okay, gentlemen. Thank you very much. So we didn't get to the second part of the class. That's fine. We can do that in the next class. That part will be on qualifications of teacher and student. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Giriraj Maharaj ki jai. Go Premanandi. Hari Hari.